everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar entitled True Road Main Street Interventions. My name is Marianne Jacques. I'm here with François Gagnon, the presenter for this webinar, and Alizé Rico, who will be available throughout the webinar to assist you with any technical difficulties you might experience. So at any time, you can communicate with us through the chat box. So don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or if you have technical issues. Just a quick note to let you know that the PowerPoint presentation and the link to the recording of this webinar will be available online after the webinar. We will send you an email tomorrow morning, including the hyperlinks to access them. So, and on a last note, please note that in order to obtain your education unit for this activity, you do need to fill out the evaluation form. From there, you'll be directed to another form that will allow you to claim your unit. So, on that note, thank you very much and enjoy the webinar.
So, hello everybody, my name is François Gagnon. I'm going to be the presenter for today. A quick word on the National Collaborating Center for Healthy Public Policy. Our mandate is to support public health actors in their efforts to promote healthy public policies across Canada, and we'll be touching upon today many of areas of expertise such as the effects of public policies on health and intersectoral actors and strategies to influence policy making. We're one of 6 centers across the country, and we're situated across the country, so 6 centers exist. If you wish to look up what they do, you have their links on our website here. I'd like to thank Alizé and Marianne that are with me today for the help and the support on the organization and technical support for this webinar, so thank you. Since this is an accredited formation, I have to declare that I have no potential conflict of interest, real or potential conflict of interest, so that's done. So to get to the subject of today, this webinar is actually part of a series of publications that we have done over the last years regarding street and road design and organization. For example, we've published on roundabouts, we've published on road diets, we've published on municipal norms that could support safe and active travel. So I engage you and encourage you to go and look up these other publications. Considering today, the webinar is from a publication that we have made, that I have produced last year in March 2015, and the topic was True Road Mainstream Interventions. We're not arguably the first to get interested in that topic. For people who speak French, you have references to the Ministry of Transportation of Quebec in the briefing note. You also have references to publications that have been made by the Federal Highway Administration in the U.S. considering the flexible design for context-sensitive solutions. It's been much more difficult to find resources in other provinces in Canada. If you have any resources that have been published by your respective provinces, please let us know. We will be happy to look at them and to reference them. So we're not the first, but so people have worked on this topic. Why we got involved is that primary topic or primary audience, the primary audience is public health actors, and most of them are not really familiar with these kinds of interventions, and they're looking for solutions in small and medium-sized communities. And so this was the first interest of us, to let people know in public health of these interventions. But also there's a certain number, like 21 publications for primary evaluations that have been done through the last years. And there was no synthesis of these evaluations, so we thought it would be a good exercise to synthesize them and to let people know, not only in public health but elsewhere, of the overall results that these kinds of interventions can lend to. So to go on before we go on with the webinar, we had a couple of questions to ask you, and Alizé is going to put them up on your slide. We wanted to know how you would qualify your degree of knowledge with regards to true road main streets. So would you say you're a beginner, an average, or advanced in that regard? Okay, so it seems that pretty much we're dealing with people who know relatively average or below average, like are beginners in that topic. So I'm going to spend a lot of time describing what these interventions are. The second question we had was regarding the video that we suggested you could look at. We're asking ourselves if you had the chance to view it. Okay, so many people didn't have a chance to look at it. So again, this was just to get an idea of where you were on overall with the knowledge on that topic. So thank you for these answers. I'm going to be moving on to the next slide. So the plan for today, like I said, I'm going to speak a while about what these interventions are and what they are and why we want to go in that direction maybe. The second part is going to be evaluation results, and the third part is going to be implications for practice, especially for people in public health. The overall idea of main streets, true road main streets intervention is to intervene on streets that serve as main streets of villages and towns, small towns and villages, but that also serve as true roads for transit, traffic in transit. These roads are most often under the jurisdiction of the Provincial Department of Transportation in Canada, but in some regions there are some regional roads. Like if you look to Ottawa, you'll find that there are some roads that are regional roads that are under the control of regional bodies. So, but mainly I think we can say that these roads are generally under the control jurisdiction of provincial departments. And so through the years, these here as elsewhere, here in Canada as elsewhere in the world, these roads have been taught and designed mostly for traffic in transit. And motor users and car users or truck users have been a bit marginalized on these roads. And other functions of the streets, like commercial or civic functions, have been a bit neglected by design standards. And so the idea that the idea is that these streets have become really predominant features and dominant features in the space of these towns and cities, and so since they negate in some way the city life, there has been some options to look at what could be done to come to a better balance between city life and traffic in transit. Just a quick word on the idea that where these interventions come from also is to look at the background. Why people have started designing streets like that is not streets and roads like that through villages in such a way. It can be related to growth in populations. Growth in population, our country has been growing in number of people that live here, and mass motorization also has started in the 1930s and 1940s, and so the number of people traveling by car, traveling by truck has steadily been increasing through the last 70 or 80 years. And this has created some dynamics that you can often relate to sprawl. We often hear about sprawl in big cities, but it's been the same thing in smaller towns and smaller municipalities. And by this phenomenon, we refer to a phenomenon whereby people go live further and further from the core neighborhood, and for example, groceries would move from downtown to outside of towns in these small cities, thereby forcing other people to travel by car more and more and on over longer distances. So the people responsible for the road network have responded to these dynamics by increasing road capacity, increasing the number of lanes, creating bigger lanes. And this is kind of the background dynamics of that. And of course, all of this has been made possible with the availability of energy resources that have made this kind of mobility possible. This has had all kinds of consequences for public health. Some were quite positive. If you think about farmers' access to markets, motorization has been really good for them. It's been creating a sustainable source of revenues where people before that were not able to access big markets and were not selling big quantities of food. And also, for example, access to healthcare services, even educational services for people living in rural areas. This has been increased through motorization, but again, overall, this has also brought negative consequences, and it's created. I like to say always that it's created quite a lot of jobs in health and in public health also. The first item that you see here is that with motorization, large-scale motorization has come a large share of trauma. Speed increasing, volumes increasing have led to more and more trauma on the road. They've also kind of marginalized people who walk, people who bike, and so these modes of transportation have been less and less common because of speed of cars, volumes of cars created kind of hostile environments for people that wanted to walk and cycle, but also because the sprawling feature of our urban landscapes, even small urban landscapes, have been creating longer and longer distances for people to travel, and this is less and less easily done by bicycle and by foot. Also, for people living in these villages, having through roads with big trucks, big number of trucks and big number of cars crossing the towns have been creating noisy environments. Here you see a wall protecting houses, and this is kind of a way of protecting the village, but it gets the idea through that it created noisy environments, especially in small urban centers, because of the speed, again, and the volumes of cars, and maybe in that case, especially trucks. And noise is related to a number of health problems related to stress, and then to sleep disturbance and other kinds of illnesses that flow from that. And so this is a good reason why people in public health should start to pay attention to that. These are similar issues as the ones that you find in big cities, but the interventions that can be made on through roads are not as clear for now, but there are some opportunities, and we'll talk about that for a few minutes now. These nuisances are these negative impacts of through roads and main streets, as they have been historically built or have been known for a while. Maybe except for noise that's been acknowledged a bit more recently, especially in North America. All the negative impacts that I've described to you have been pretty much documented, and we've known about them for a while. And even the transportation planners and engineers have been knowledgeable around that, and so they have responded, and their first historical response to these problems has been to create bypass roads, and these are roads that are made to circumvent downtowns and smaller towns, and so here what you have is an image of five I forget the word, but five ways where public ways could go outside of city center. But these interventions are not always possible, and they're not always desirable in many ways. First of all, these cost a lot to build. It's probably the first reason why today there's a big look taken at that, and there's a kind of slowing down of the motion of creating more bypass roads, and probably that's a good explanation why people are starting to look at through road Main Street interventions that keep the through traffic in the towns. A second idea why these are not always desirable is that sometimes I've seen evaluations of projects that have concluded that up to 85% of the traffic was in fact local traffic. So there's not much, in some cases, there's not much traffic in transit going through town, really. So creating a bypass is a bit expensive for such a low number of cars and trucks. And otherwise than that, there's often also a fear of displacing residential places, and also grocery stores, for example, moving on the side and outside of the city centers, and pursuing the dynamics that I just described to you before of urban sprawl, even in smaller communities. So these are all reasons that are laid out to seek other avenues, and especially intervene and find a better balance on the existing network, and so on through road and Main Street interventions. Just to give you an idea, what you have on the left is the town of Kearney. For those of you who saw the video, the video was about that town, this intervention in that town. And what you see on the left is the road before. That's the through road or Main Street before, and what it became after is what you have on the right. So I think this gives a pretty clear indication of what we're trying to achieve here, a better balance between through traffic and motorized vehicle traffic and other forms of goods, such as walking, cycling, but also a better quality of life overall in the downtown cores by redistributing a bit the space here and creating a median where pedestrians could stop and pause so the cars pass, and then they can go across the street with a relative feeling of safety. And this is the same idea here from another point of view. That's the same thing I wanted to convey, redistributing space, reconfiguring the street. Interventions on these streets are possible, and they can facilitate older people traveling relatively high volume street. This is possible, and it's been, I'll talk to you about it a bit more later, it's been quite successful. That said, through road and Main Street interventions are not all the same, and they're not, certainly not on the level of what you seen in the video, of what you see just presented through photos here in Kearney in Switzerland. This is a pretty intensive intervention, and my way of convening the idea that it's a very intensive intervention is that in that case the speed limit has been reduced from 50 to 30 kilometers per hour. There's no, there are a couple of examples that have been popping up through the last years. For example, in France, I've seen reports on 4 different speed reduction to 30 kilometers, but in Canada, the only one I know is in Saint-Irénée in Quebec, in the region of Charlevoix, for those who know this part of Quebec. It's a very touristy town, a high-end touristic place, and the ministry has agreed to lower the speed limit the Ministry of Transportation has agreed to reduce the speed limit to 30 kilometers per hour on this section of this road or street that crosses really the core of the town. But this is quite exceptional. I think most of what we can expect to see both in Quebec and Canada and in North America generally, but what we can expect and what we witness is more like medium intervention or light intervention. that seek to reduce the actual operating speed of cars and trucks to the posted speed limit, which is often 50 kilometers per hour through downtowns. But there are exceptions. This is not a perfect classification. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be extensive and very sharp. But it just means to be exemplary in the sense that it gives you an idea of what type of interventions are out there. But you can easily find exceptions to that. Even in the evaluations that I've presented in a briefing note, you'll see that some interventions have brought down the speed from 90 to 60. Some others have brought down the speed from 50 to 40. So there are numerous examples that would not fit in my classification here. Again, the idea was not to convey a specific classification, but just to give you a sense that there are true road main street interventions come in different stripes and with different ambitions and objectives. More or less aggressive regarding speed. I'm talking about speed principally because this is the main mechanism of the intervention. Management of speed is a key thing in all aspects of what we're trying to achieve in terms of noise, in terms of traffic accidents, or everything else. So it's a key feature of these interventions to work on speed, either on posted speed or operating speed, more also likely. What they have all in common, these interventions, whether they're light, medium, or intensive, I think it's pretty safe to say that you always see transition measures. Transition measures are dispositive, whether they be rumble stripes, for example, or roundabouts, or other things that signal the entry or the exit of the town. So the person driving a car, driving a truck, for example, knows through this dispositive that it's changing, the environment is changing. It's going from a rural countryside type of environment to an urban center where there are people walking, there are people cycling, there might be other types of obstacles that he needs to be careful of. So in all of these cases, I think it's pretty fair to say that you will find, or this would be the minimum requirement for any intervention, even though you can find some examples where there would not be transition measures. I think it's a fair assessment overall that you will find these. Just to go on, trying to differentiate a bit the intensity of the various interventions. As you saw in Q&As, there are some preferential measures for collective transportation and active transportation. For example, buses are allowed to cross before cars at specific points, entry points through the downtown. And for active transportation, you see that people on foot, for example, are allowed to cross anywhere. They've stripped the road from the crosswalks that were marked, and they stripped them, and they allowed people walking to cross anywhere in the street. So that's a preferential measure for active transportation. They've also included demand management strategies, like I was talking about signals at the entry of the town, for example. They've put in some lights that make it possible to manage the number of cars going through downtown at a specific point in time. So they will not allow too many cars to go downtown. I've talked about this because that's what you saw in the video. That gives you an idea just to the extent to which we could bring these interventions. But again, this is not typical in North America, certainly. And for example, we don't have that much. Our collective transportation systems are, especially in smaller areas, are not that strong and would not be feasible for that. Last word on that. On medium intervention, I guess you could say that you would also find other measures than transition measures. For example, with lane width reduction, the lane width norms that have been put in place by provincial Department of Transportation have been those that are used also on highways generally, and so you can often see some interventions on lane width. This is done through marking, but also through the introduction of central islands, for example, that make it possible for people walking to protect themselves when they are crossing a street or a road. So just some examples of transition measures here. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Transition measure. On the left here, you see a roundabout that can be used, and that has been used in Quebec in a couple of places. Saint-Irénée, Charlevoix, where I was talking about the 30 kilometer speed limit earlier. They have used the roundabout to slow down the cars to 30 kilometers. But also, I'm giving you an example that something is used in France. It blocks actually a lane. So people coming in the city, when they see a car, they have to stop and let the other car pass. So that's not something we see pretty much in North America. It's just to give you an idea of what can be done. In the middle of the towns, you can often see some, on the right, I was talking about Central Island. Here you have the Central Island on the right here has been used to reduce the lane width and also to offer space for protected space for pedestrians. And this is one of the typical things that you can see more likely in North America. You're going to see these types of interventions in some places. And so that slows down cars. Reducing lane width is going to slow down cars and trucks and offer protected space for pedestrians again. I could have shown you other examples. For example, road diets. They have been used in a couple of places. Road diets involve the removal of a lane on typically a 2 lane in each direction road. You're going to have a 1 lane reduced reduction, and you're going to have one left turn lane in the middle, and you're going to have insertion, for example, of bike lanes or widening of sidewalks on the side. You can see a paper of us on road diets on our website. So since there are no comments, I'm going to go on. Don't hesitate if you have questions or comments, put them on as we go along. If you have questions of precisions or comments on what is presented to you, don't hesitate to write something. I don't see anything, so I'm going to go on. Second part of the presentation is evaluation results. Just before I go on with the results in themselves, just note that the diversity of interventions that I've just presented needs to be kept in mind for people that want to understand the results I'm going to present. Of course, you're not going to have the same results for very intensive interventions as you saw in Quenis, or lighter interventions that consist mostly of transition measures. If you have only a transition measure, it's likely not going to give the same results as intervention, very intensive intervention as you saw in Quenis. So keep in mind when I'm going to talk about the results, keep in mind these things, these ideas. In terms of metallurgical limits, there are quite a few evaluations that we've recuperated and saw and synthesized in our briefing note. It's 21. It's not overall very good. It's not 200 studies, but it gives a sense of a direction of where the results are going. But there are limits also to this. For example, there's not often case controls, which are often looked at. On the upside, there are two things. Many of the studies control for many years before and after, which is something that's also looked for in evaluation of the quality of evaluation, because it controls for the regression to the means effect, which is a big bias in terms of fines. On the upside also, types of interventions we're talking about is very coherent with similar interventions that have been focusing on speed management and speed control. Like, for example, we published a synthesis of traffic calming in large urban areas. It's quite congruent. The mechanisms of actions are the same. Of course, it's not really always the same interventions that are put in place, but the same principles of acting on speed seem to be fairly coherent with the results that we see in similar interventions. I've talked about urban traffic calming, but I could have talked about also road diets or other types of interventions of this sort. So keep all of this in mind when I'm going to be talking about the results from the next slides on, which I'm going to be going through right now. So a big part, like I've said, the main mechanism of action of this the intervention, this type of intervention is speed control, and this has been looked at with all the studies that we've been through. I encourage you to go to the table. I'm not going to give numbers here or statistics. I'm just going to give you a sense of direction or of where this is going. Giving you numbers here would be a bit confusing or meaningless even, because, like I said, the results are really related to the types of interventions that we have that have been looked at by various evaluations. So the first indicator of speed that's often looked at in terms of transportation is V85. V85 is actually the 85th percentile speed, and that means, in plain language, that means that, for example, if you have a V85 of 60 kilometers per hour, 85% of the cars and trucks or the vehicles are going to be going at 60 or less, and 15% are going to be going above that. Average speed doesn't need an explanation. Speed variation is looked at. Speed variation means the amplitude between the lower speed and the higher speed of vehicles. This is looked at. This is not often looked at, but when it's looked at, it's important, because speed variation as speed itself is an important determinant of traffic collisions. It's also an important determinant of noise, for example, especially if you're talking about large number of trucks. The variations in speed are really noisy as they get higher. So this is an important determinant, and you'll see if you look at the tables that we've presented that all the results that are presented in evaluations go in the same direction, which is we can manage speed and we can reduce speed to the 2-hour interventions on these streets. And all of them conclude that there's been a reduction of some sort. Of course, this is related to the ambitiousness or the ambition of the interventions. Like I said before, if you want to reduce by 30 kilometers per hour, you're not going to have the same result. So I'm not going to give numbers, but just to give you an indication, some places have managed to reduce by 20 to 25 kilometers per hour their speed when they've decided that they wanted to lower the speed. Traffic flow is another important dimension of traffic studies, always, or transportation evaluations. Traffic flow in terms of through road main street interventions, the objective is not really to reduce the traffic flow, but an indicator of traffic flow that is often used is travel time. Travel time refers to the time it takes for a vehicle to cross a given distance. And when that's been looked at, of course, if you remember the results on speed, we've lowered speeds generally, so of course travel time is going to increase most of the time. There's an exception to that, with the exception being that of Kyriennes. One has to understand that the exception of Kyriennes is quite understandable. Their speed has been reduced, but travel time has been reduced also. The situation before the intervention in Kyriennes was that of congestion. The problem generally identified before a true road main street intervention is not one of congestion generally. It's more one of speed or inappropriate speeding through towns. So the objective was not really the same here. The objective was more to increase traffic flow, and so in that case, the travel time was actually reduced, even though the speed was lowered. We can talk about this a bit more if you have questions about that. Traffic flow, another indicator of traffic flow is that of level of service. In lay terms, we often talk about a degree of congestion or something like that. Maybe you've seen, that's a measure, actually level of service is a measure of delay at a given point on the road network. It's often used at intersections. It's often measured at intersections. So you often see that this is expressed in terms of a scale from A to F, A being the ideal state of affairs, whereby cars and trucks would not have any impediment to their progression, and F being that of a complete gridlock or something of the sort. And so the idea behind, or the objective behind the interventions we're talking about is not to degrade or to reduce the level of service. So it's been looked at, and the results overall is that the level of service has either remained the same or it's actually increased in some places, especially in talking here about Kunis again. Traffic volumes is another one, and the indicator one of the indicators that's often used is the annual average daily traffic. That's an approximation of the number of cars and vehicles more generally that go through a specific section of the road network. And this is calculated at different points in a year, and an average is made of how many cars go by on a day, or vehicles more generally. The idea behind or the objective is not really to reduce the annual average daily traffic, and when that has been looked at, it's not been the case. So either the annual average daily traffic has remained the same, or it's even increased in some places. And the exception being that of Kunis. I mentioned that they had some. I mentioned that. I'm sorry, we have a question. I'm gonna stop in a while to respond. But the exception would being that of Kunis. There was. I mentioned that they had put in some traffic management devices, especially designed to reduce the number of cars going through downtown because there was a gridlock. So that was a specific design, and they managed to accomplish it too. And so in these terms, these were a success. So I'm going to pause for a minute just to respond to the question. How is speed data like V85 usually collected? Well, it's actually speed collection is made through radar detection oftentimes. So you'll have a radar installed on the side of the road, and the V85 is usually only a matter of calculation with these inputs. You have the speed, and you can either calculate the means or you can calculate the V85. Why the 85 was targeted is I haven't looked it up, but it could be V70, but that's V85 is a convention, I mean, between the transition planners and engineers. So that is what is usually looked at. But so to respond shortly to the question is through a radar and statistics calculations. So if I have not answered your question, please post another one. Road safety is a predominant preoccupation and predominant feature in the evaluations also. We have various measures or indicators related to collisions, either that you will see in the evaluation results that they have resulted in material damage or injuries, or even in some cases you'll see that there are different degree of seriousness of injuries that are going to be collected. So you'll see some indicators of minor injuries, serious injuries, and collisions resulting in death, and various combinations of or categorizations of these indicators. And this you can see pretty easily in the table I've referred to a couple of times. So in in all the evaluations, you'll see that the speed management has been successful at reducing the number of collisions, and of a matter of, in terms of public health, serious injuries and deaths are often more looked at than any other indicators. For example, in public health, we don't tend to look at collisions with material damage only. But in terms of injury seriousness, if you look at the results, you're going to see that there's a tendency for deaths and serious injuries to be significantly reduced, more so than collisions with material damage. So that's often the case in many interventions related to speed. You're going to see that what is most affected is the most serious categories of injuries, and so that's pretty interesting from a public health point of view. As I said a couple of times, it's difficult to pinpoint one number, but overall, it seems pretty clear when you look at the evaluation results that they're related to the intensity of interventions on speed. That's something that I've repeated a couple of times again. This is related also. This is also related to the types of measures and the combinations of measures that are used in the interventions. By that, I just want to say a few words on that. Generally, the consensus I would not say the large consensus, but it's pretty widespread belief that the types of measures that are the most effective are those that are other than marking a signal alone. So it's often said that physical design measures like speed humps or speed cushions or roundabouts would be more effective than signals. And that's been verified in a couple of studies, especially in the ones coming from the UK that you're going to see in the table. But there are a couple of exceptions to that in the review that I've done. If you look at the French evaluation, you're going to see that a couple of these interventions have been made with only markings and signals. Some of them also incorporating parking on the side of the road. The allowance of parking on the side of the road was actually an integral part of the speed reduction measures. What I want to convey here is that we tend to think that we need physical measures, and I wouldn't say no in all cases. I think it's pretty much true in many times, but we have precedents whereby only marking and signals have been quite effective at reducing both speed and both collisions and injuries. And so what the message here is kind of, we don't have to think about very expensive things sometimes to make quite interesting improvements if we want to go down that road. Because cost is, of course, an important input in the decision to make or not an intervention. I just wanted to highlight that because I think it might be blocking that we have too often when we don't look at some types of interventions that are possible. Noise is less of a preoccupation in the evaluations. You're going to see that there might be 4 or 5 studies that have looked at that, not the 21. Noise is important in public health because of stress, because of reduced sociality, because of reduced degraded sleep patterns, for example, leading to all sorts of more or less chronic outcomes. There are 2 ways that you're going to see that in the literature that the noise is measured. The first one is noise emissions. That refers to a measure of the noise at the source. In this case, it refers to noise emission at the level of the car or the truck going through town. A more common measure, and I think that's pretty becoming more and more the norm in terms of looking at transportation evaluations, is that we're looking at ambient noise. And ambient noise, typically you're going to have sensors recuperating the noise the noise waves on the side of the road or at a distance from the road, some distance from the road, and what is sought after there is to look at what it feels to be not close to the car, but really in the context of the village or the municipality, where in the real places, and with all the variables that can influence noise distribution, people are going to be looking at that. And overall, the results seem again to be good. In many cases, noise has been reduced more or less significantly. There's only, and just to give you a sense, we tend to say that reduction in 4 decibels registered is equivalent to the reduction of perception of noise of half, and in some cases, there's been reduction in some studies of up to 12 or 13 decibels. So that's almost 3 times what I just described. So it's a significant reduction of noise. But I have to note one exception to what I'm talking about is one, I think, from the evaluations has to get the sense that the use of rumble strips as transition measures might be problematic in many cases, especially if you're, and I'm talking here if you're close to some houses. It might be worth thinking about this twice or even 3 times, because in the evaluations you're going to see some increase of up to 8 or 9 decibels for these types of measures. So they have been implemented a few years back. From what I sense, I think that they use less and less, and that's probably related to the noise they generate, because it seems that in terms of reducing speed, they seem to be pretty effective, but the noise seems to be a big problem with these types of measures. Talking about objective noise is not the same as talking about perception of noise, and so some researchers have been looking at the perception of noise and also of operating speed of cars and vehicles. And when people are asked, and so they would ask people living in the villages or towns how they felt about the interventions, how they reduced speed and noise, and you get the sense from these evaluations that one has to be very humble about how people are going to perceive that, because most people will say that they have seen no changes in speed, and no changes in speed or no change or a very big decrease or increasing noise. Researchers have tried to explain these results because they don't seem to be very current with the objective measures that just presented, that have shown, generally reductions in noise emissions and no ambient noise. And so they looked for explanations because it didn't make sense. And in one case, it seems that there were expectations from in a specific village that there was going to be a road bypass. People had been pushing the transport authority to create a bypass, and when this did not materialize, but the authority decided rather to create an intervention on the main street, they were a bit deceived. Their expectations were not met. And also specific measures were identified as especially problematic. For example, speed cautions are kind of they are measures that are meant for trucks and large vehicles to pass over without having to slow down or having to slow down as much as cars. Cars will have to go through up on them like they do on speed humps, but big vehicles like buses or fire trucks technically can pass over them without touching them, and so have less incitation to reduce their speed. But in some cases, these measures have been clipped a number of times by trucks, buses, and fire trucks, and people living near them, could not appreciate very much these clippings all the time of these devices. So when one is putting in these types of measures, it should be looked at a bit more carefully, maybe. A category that has been titled Use and Perception of the Streets and of its Edges means there are other, as alluded to the idea that there are other functions of these streets and other users of these streets. Researchers have looked at crossing or parallel travel to the streets or roads, and thus people have noted that it's been easier for people to cross or to travel in parallel either by bike or by car. Researchers again have tried to understand that, and when they were asked, people said that the feeling of security was better. The insecurity was reduced in other terms, so they felt more at ease of crossing the street or traveling parallel, either walking or biking. Also, they noted that many people felt very happy about the quality of the place, and thus felt more at ease of walking on the side of the road or a street, and even of sitting down for coffee and buying things in stores. Other things worth noting in that category are category vehicles, emergency vehicles. There have been mostly people have been happy. People working in the emergency services have been happy, but in a couple of instances, they've noted some problems with the roundabout whose capacity was not enough, and so created some difficulties, and also with the speed dumps that were making their patients not very comfortable when they were crossing them. Also, in terms of commercial activity, in the case of Kearney's, the overall scheme was deemed a success in terms of this was a plan to revitalize the downtown, but also but that came with the downside of neglecting or disincentivizing people of going further away from downtown, and so some stores outside of town were collectively were affected negatively. And so in terms of political dynamics, that might be something that one has to be aware of. So there's not much comments or questions, so I'm going to keep on moving. And I'm going to be talking here mostly to people in public health because that's our primary audience. One of the challenges that you might have is to identify opportunities for creating interventions such as what we've been talking about. It's not always evident of where this is possible, both in policy terms, in politics terms, if you will, but also where this would be pertinent. But there are a couple of examples that I think are worth noting. There are, for example, in Montérégie, just south of the big region of Montreal here, the Montérégie Public Health Department has created maps of traumas that are happening in their region on roads, and they show pretty much big concerns. They make visible big concerns around through roads, and they show that there are a number of collisions and traumas happening on the through roads, and so this has been looked at in other regions of Quebec, but I suggest that in other provinces this could be something that public health authorities could be starting to manage. I think in BC you already have with the ICBC a very easy tool to map up the traumas, because they share their data on traumas happening, their collision statistics around the province. So you could draw maps of what's going on in BC pretty easily, I guess. Maybe some people can respond to that, but it seems from my point of view that could be something done. If you want to have some links to what the DSP Montérégie, the Public Health Department of Montérégie has done, you can write to us and we'll send you links. Another issue is to qualify the opportunities. Is it important to do a very intensive intervention? Can we go for something lighter and cheaper, probably at the same time? What is the openness of the provincial DOTs, the Provincial Department of Transportation, to creating interventions on those streets and roads, because they are, after all, under their jurisdiction? And so you need probably to look at what has been done in terms of interventions, what precedents exist in your region, how open are the responsible people for these roads and streets. So you need to engage probably in a conversation with the people at the Ministry of Transportation that you have in your region. And maybe also look at the differences in types of roads. In Quebec, we have a classification of streets, of roads that make the 100 list is our principal roads. So these are less likely to be intervened very heavily on by the Ministry of Transportation, whereby the 200, 300, and 400 series here are secondary roads. So maybe they're more open to compromises with regards to speed and volumes on these roads, streets. And so, again, these are just ideas of what you could be thinking about in terms of what can we think about qualifying opportunities, but also if you look at the traumas, that might be a good idea of what type of interventions would be needed. I think I'm going to pause because I think that my last point is pointing towards the question that we received by Sue. How would you suggest addressing cross-jurisdictional issues? You noted that true roads are often provincial, but the interest in improvement is local. How do you get the province to engage in improvements? Also, who usually pays for the cost? Who pays for the cost is, if I'm right about what's going on in Quebec, what is going on in the town, actually, like putting in a cycle path or putting in a crosswalk, would be the responsibility of the municipality. The provincial government is generally responsible here for interventions on transition measures when they are at the border when people are at the transition measures level, so at the urban perimeter level. So this is more or less how the cost or split here in Quebec. You would have to look through what's going on in each of your province. Each province has its own funding mechanism and requirements. How would you suggest addressing cross-jurisdictional issues? I think I mentioned a few things already on that topic. If you want to identify opportunities, maybe you need to be looking at in terms of with public health, you need to be doing some work and looking, where we have problems related to public health. Trauma is a big one, but if you start doing maps around noise, you might use that as a tool to engage other stakeholders and pay other stakeholders to pay attention to other criteria than speed or capacity of streets. So on that, I think we're pretty much through the presentation. There's 1 minute left, and we try to stay on topic, on time. If you have other questions, don't hesitate either to contact me through the phone. We won't have much time to go again through questions or comments, but I'm going to leave you with that. The evaluation and continuing education credits, Marianne alluded to the fact that you're going to get an evaluation link after this webinar. Thanks for joining us. We're really looking for examples to share, and we don't have much time and resources to go around the country and mapping examples of what's going on in every other provinces. So if you have examples from your provinces that you'd like to share, please send us some links, some photos, some documents or anything, and we will be looking at them and see how we can share them further with other people that are following our work. So thank you very much. Have a good day.